Hi friends, welcome back to another episode of Generation Tech. My name is Alan. So I first met our other host Ben many years back on Coruscant after picking up some Imperial shipping contracts. He was my liaison officer. I remember thinking to myself, oh great, here comes another one of those uptight imps, all hoity-toity and self-righteous. Now don't get me wrong, he was all of those things. He was always going on about how great the Empire was and how they were going to save us all from chaos. But as I got to know him more, I realized he was actually a decent guy. Annoying, but always fair and consistent. As the Empire started degrading and eventually began to collapse after the Battle of Endor, so did the many lucrative Imperial shipping contracts. Which was a shame, because very few commodities gave you a better return than Wookiee slaves. Eventually, between pirates and Mon Calamari patrols, it just wasn't worth being a smuggler anymore. And that's when I sold my ship and became a YouTuber. Now, the moral of that story is that not everything is so black and white. Despite what you might have heard from rebel sympathizers, there are actually some really great individuals in the Empire that were dedicated to keeping everyone safe and alive. Now, I firmly believe that our environment greatly affects how we choose to live our life. A bad man can do great things when placed in a good environment, while a good man can do bad things when placed in a bad environment. But it takes a special individual to not be affected by their surroundings and stay true to themselves. Here are the 5 types of good Imperials that I've run across in my travels. And pay close attention, you might just be one of them. The first type is what I call the day jobber. These individuals see the Empire as a job and nothing more. Many of these Imperials were first drawn to the Empire by the promise of excitement and perhaps an escape from their otherwise boring and backwards planets. Thane Kyrell, ace Imperial pilot, was a perfect example. Growing up on the Outer Rim planet of Jalukan, his only chance to get off the world was to join the Empire. The day jobber was usually quite good at their job and relatively perceptive. They were naturally suspicious of people who were too ideologically driven. If this sounds like Han Solo to you, well, in Legends he actually used to be an Imperial pilot, and he was definitely a day jobber. After the Battle of Yavin, when more extreme measures were taken by the Emperor, many of these day jobbers began seeing the darker side of the Empire. You see, despite their neutral stance on almost everything, day jobbers were actually just really good at hiding their emotions and true feelings. Kinda like when I pretend your mean comments don't hurt mine. It was their nature of self-preservation and their ability to stay out of the limelight which allowed day jobbers to survive in the Empire. Of course, that also meant that they never reached a higher rank. Now, there were some exceptions, like Eli Vanto, but that was more due to his tutelage with Grand Admiral Thrawn. He also showed that a day jobber who was lucky enough to serve under another good Imperial can do well in the Empire. It takes courage and intelligence to realize that being cruel to others serves almost no purpose. The next good Imperial is the mastermind. The mastermind has a higher level of intelligence than most Imperial officers. They also have a decent moral compass and use their reasoning and logic to enforce it. Thrawn is the most extreme version of the mastermind. His deeply analytical mind oftentimes saved Imperial lives, but also saved the lives of his enemies. And he always had a justification for doing so. Sometimes it was for interrogation purposes. Sometimes it was to prevent more radicals from joining the fight. Other times he maneuvered his opponents into a position where they were no longer threats. And once he even spared an individual known as the Night Swan because he wanted to recruit him. The mastermind was always looking at the bigger picture, and were usually many steps ahead of his enemy and even those around him. But this is also what made the mastermind a constant target. Very few individuals actually understood how they thought, and many were jealous of their constant success. Masterminds recognized there were problems with the Empire, but saw no rational alternative. They regarded the rebels as a chaotic faction with more problems than solutions. They truly believed that with their help, the Empire could bring stability against chaos and strength against external threats. In their pursuit to strengthen the Empire, the mastermind often brought individuals they deemed competent under their wings. Wolf Yularen helped both Thrawn and Governor Pryce on a few different occasions, seeing both of them as investments for the Empire's future. In the end, the mastermind was almost too brilliant to get rid of. They always achieved great results in whatever they did, and because their intellect was so high, they were always able to achieve it the way they wanted to do it. Loyalty is usually seen as a very desirable trait, and those who practice it are usually exceptional human beings. This is the honor-bound Imperial. They sometimes came from a culture that put an emphasis on the importance of loyalty. As Thrawn is the most extreme version of the Mastermind, Ciena is the most extreme version of the honor-bound Imperial. She came from a tribe of people whose ancestors were exiled because of their own loyalty to their former king. She held tightly onto these beliefs as well, and throughout the entire war, her loyalty to the Empire never wavered, despite the fact that her own mother was thrown into prison by corrupt Imperial officials. Despite the fact her one true love deserted and joined the rebellion, and despite the fact the destruction of Alderaan shook her to her beliefs and the construction of the second one made her sick with disgust. Despite all of this, she stayed loyal till the end. In her final act as an Imperial officer, she attempted to keep a Star Destroyer out of the hands of the rebels during the Battle of Jakku by ramming it into the planet's surface. She hoped that by dying she could finally be released from her oath to the Empire and at the same time maintain her honor. Now, Ciena was an extreme version of the honor-bound Imperial, but many of them all shared similarities. Because they held honor in such high regard, they also had extremely strong moral compasses, along with a very strong set of beliefs. And it's because of this stubbornness they end up being the ones that suffer the most. Of course, they'll lie to themselves and make excuses for the Empire, but in the end, they'll realize the truth. These next individuals are usually civilians or at least non-combatants. They're the professional Imperials. Like Zahara, Cody, the medical officer on the prison barge Purge. Although many of her fellow Imperials thought she was too sympathetic to the prisoners, she was still able to do good because it was in her job description to naturally do so. But the greatest danger any professional Imperial could face was being too good at their job. Such was the case of Galen Erso, the scientist and kyber crystal expert who was responsible for the main weapon on the Death Star. Like the honor-bound Imperial, Galen tried to convince himself that his work was actually being used for energy development and not being weaponized into a giant destructive laser. In the end, Galen was able to satisfy his own moral agenda by sabotaging the Death Star by adding one weakness in its design. The professional Imperial often was the most dangerous individual. Their technology or inventions could affect the lives of millions. And oftentimes, the promise of better resources and more funding blinded them from the truth. But because these were often extremely intelligent people, it was almost impossible to hide the Empire's true intention from them. Many good Imperials eventually become this fifth type of good Imperial, and this usually occurs after they can no longer do their duty and also uphold their moral values. These are the Imperial Defectors. They come from all sorts of different backgrounds, and it's usually one life-changing event that pushes them overboard. Agent Kallus is a notable example of the Imperial Defector. After being saved by Lasat rebel Zeb Aurelios, Kallus began his transformation to Fulcrum. Daric, LaRone, and a squad of stormtroopers were also Imperial Defectors after being confronted by an ISB officer for not shooting innocent civilians. LaRone killed the officer in self-defense and his squad went AWOL. They would go on to form the vigilante group known as the Hand of Judgment. When I first saw Star Wars on VHS as a little boy in my grandmother's house, I instantly fell in love with the rebellion. And throughout my life, I'd like to think that I've embodied many of the traits of a good rebel. But as I got older and wiser and began reading the expanded universe, I started gaining an appreciation for the idealistic vision of the Empire that so many good Imperials seem to believe in. As much as I disagree with many of the Empire's decisions, I hate it when people try to spread false information and make generalizations in an attempt to educate people that they deem unworthy of knowing the truth. I'll take an honest Imperial over a lying rebel any day. Guys, if you enjoyed this episode and are curious about learning more about some of the characters we talked about, I'll link some of the books down below that I've read that helped me make this video. Don't forget to hit that subscribe and notification button so you don't miss out on all of our new content. And a special thanks to all you Patreon supporters out there. I bet if you guys were Imperials, you'd be one of the good ones. As usual, thanks for joining us. If you're watching this, you are Generation Tech.